In this video, we are going to do a deep dive into Microsoft Fabric access control. We are going to cover access control on multiple levels and also clarify the differences between all of those admin roles, like Fabric admin, Capacity admin, Domain admin, and Workspace admin. So if you really want to learn how access control works in Fabric, you have to watch this video. So stay tuned. Welcome to the video. My name is Alex and on this channel I cover Microsoft Fabric and Azure related topics. In this video we will continue our DP-700 exam prep series and link to the entire playlist can be found in the description. This is the episode 17 in this DP-700 exam prep series, and in this episode we will do a deep dive into Fabric's access control and cover it from all the way from the tenant level to the item level. Then in the next episode we are going to dive even deeper and cover object, row and column level access. Like in every episode in this series, we will first start with the theory section, followed by demos/tutorials from Fabric, and then we end the episode with few questions related to topics covered in this episode, so that you can test your knowledge. But now, let's get started. Before we do a deep dive to access control, let us quickly recap the core structure of Microsoft Fabric that we already covered in the beginning of this series. You might remember that Fabric sits under a Microsoft Entra tenant. That tenant is like your organization's control center. It handles identity and access control across all Microsoft cloud services, including Fabric. Fabric itself is a cloud data platform that is enabled per tenant. Workspaces are where you build solutions. Every Fabric user gets a personal My Workspace, but you can also create shared workspaces for different teams like finance or supply chain. These workspaces are then linked to a capacity. To run anything in Fabric, you need capacity. Capacity means compute resources. It is what powers all the workspaces and data workloads. Bigger capacities mean more compute, but they also cost more. Capacity is main cost driver in Fabric. To manage governance, workspaces can be grouped into domains. Domains can represent business areas like sales or finance. Inside the domain, you can also create subdomains for more detailed grouping, like separating international and domestic sales. Inside each workspace, you create Fabric items. These include things like data flows, notebooks, pipelines, event streams, and lakehouses. These items are the core building blocks you use to build data solutions. Some items like warehouses or lakehouses allow you to go even deeper and create objects. For example, tables, views, and stored procedures. So this is the full picture. Even though Fabric is one platform per tenant, all of these layers help us manage access and governance inside Fabric. And here on the next slide, we can see the structure of Microsoft Fabric represented in a slightly different way. I have intentionally removed domains and subdomains from this picture to keep it focused and clear, and we will come back to those later in this episode. You can also see that Fabric is just one of the services that organizations typically have. In many environments, services like Microsoft Teams and SharePoint are also part of the setup. All of these services are part of the same Microsoft Entra tenant, which handles identity and access management for the entire organization. In this episode, we are going to focus on how access control works across different levels of Fabric. We will start at the top with the tenant level and then move through the capacity and workspace level, and finally we will reach the item level where you can create things like lakehouses, warehouses, and notebooks. In the next episode, we will go even deeper and cover more granular access control features on object level. That includes object level permissions, row level security, and column level access. Now let us take a moment to talk about one of the most important access control principles, the principle of least privilege. This principle is very simple to understand, but extremely powerful when applied correctly. It means that we should give users the minimum level of access they need and nothing more. So instead of giving someone broad access just to make things easier, we want to assign the smallest set of permissions that still allows them to do their job. Why this is so important in Microsoft Fabric and basically in any other system or service. First, it reduces the risk of data leaks and accidental changes or misuse of sensitive resources. By keeping access tightly controlled, we lower the chances of mistakes or security problems. Second, it improves manageability. When permissions are clearly defined and limited, it is easier to keep track of who can do what and why. Third, it helps contain damage in cases something goes wrong. For example, if account is compromised. If the account only has access to Workspace instead of the entire platform, the impact is much smaller. And finally, it supports auditing and security reviews. It is easier to validate the access when you know that each user only has the permissions they actually need. So as we continue learning about access control in Fabric, we want to keep this principle in mind and apply it whenever we assign roles and permissions. In the DP-700 exam, you might hear the mention about this principle, and then you should be able to narrow down the options to the access that gives least amount of access on top of the access that the user really needs. So if you need to give an access to a lakehouse, just grant that and not an access to the entire workspace. Now let's start our rabbit hole with these different Fabric accesses, and let's do this in a top to bottom manner so that we start all the way from the tenant level and from the highest possible admin role that can be granted, that is the global administrator. Basically, this is the highest level of access that can be granted at the tenant level and gives keys to the kingdom in a sense. A global administrator can manage all aspects of Microsoft Entra ID and also manage all Microsoft Cloud services that rely on Entra identities. So the scope of this admin right far exceeds Microsoft Fabric scope. From the Microsoft Fabric's perspective, the global administrator has full control. They can assign any role within the tenant, including assigning other global administrators. They can also promote themselves into any role in Fabric. Good thing to note here is that this role doesn't get automatic admin access to the workspace level, but can easily grant themselves to have that access if need be. They can enable or disable Microsoft Fabric for entire organization. They can also access tenant-level Fabric settings and view activity through the admin monitoring workspace. Because how powerful this role is, you need to be very careful with who has it. In most cases, you don't want to give global administrator rights to just anybody. This should be limited to only few trusted people in the entire organization. If somebody only needs to manage Fabric and not other services, it is usually better to assign them the Fabric administrator role instead. That role has a much narrower scope and comes with fewer risks. So, to summarize, the global administrator can access and control everything. They sit at the very top of the hierarchy and can override all other roles. This role should be always used with caution. Next, let's talk about Fabric administrator role that is far better option than global administrator role in most cases, since it is scoped only to Fabric. Here I have a table comparing these two admin roles. First, scope. The global administrator has access to the entire Microsoft tenant. This includes all the services like Teams, SharePoint, Exchange, and Microsoft Fabric. In contrast, the Fabric administrator only has access to Microsoft Fabric. They do not have visibility or control over other services. Next, access level. Global administrators have full access to all services. Fabric administrators only have access to Fabric-related settings. Their permissions are limited to the data platform space. Then, access management. A global admin can manage all users, groups, and roles across the tenant. They can even assign or remove global admin rights from others. Fabric admins, on the other hand, can only manage access that is related to Microsoft Fabric. They cannot touch Entra ID or tenant-wide user settings, which means that they can't grant other people with Fabric admin role. Now, Fabric settings. Global admins have the power to enable or disable Microsoft Fabric for the whole tenant. They can also assign or remove Fabric admin roles. Fabric admin can manage Fabric settings only if Fabric is already enabled for the tenant. Next is security settings. This is a big difference. Global admins can configure security features like multi-factor authentication, conditional access, and identity protection policies. Fabric admins cannot access or modify any of those. They are limited to settings inside Microsoft Fabric only. So, from the point of view of the limitations, the global administrator role has no limitations. On the other hand, Fabric admins are restricted to Fabric scope. They cannot touch services, settings, or identities outside of Microsoft Fabric. Finally, the use case. You should use the global administrator role for full tenant level control. This role should be only given to few trusted people in the organization. The Fabric admin role is more appropriate for those who only need to manage Microsoft Fabric without having broader administrative access to the other systems. And as a side note, there is also Power Platform administrator role. This role gives administrative access to Microsoft Fabric, but also includes other services like Power Apps and Power Automate, so it has a wider scope than a Fabric admin, but still more limited than the global admin. For these admin roles, Microsoft Fabric includes a special workspace called Admin Monitoring Workspace. This workspace gives administrators visibility into what is happening across Fabric, including all workspaces, items, domains, and capacities in use. It provides a series of pre-built reports and dashboards, like this content sharing report, which you can see here. The Admin Monitoring Workspace is automatically available to Fabric and global admins. You do not need to build these reports yourself. They are included and updated by Microsoft. So if you want clear, centralized view what is going on in Fabric, this is your go-to place. Let's now take a look at the Capacity Administrator role in Microsoft Fabric. Unlike a global or Fabric administrator, a Capacity admin can only manage a specific capacity, not the entire tenant. That means that their responsibility is limited to the defined set of compute resources inside Microsoft Fabric. The Capacity admin controls which workspaces are assigned to that capacity. They can divide which teams or solutions get access to the compute power of that capacity unit. They can also configure workload settings such as Spark behavior. This allows fine-tuning how different data workloads run on shared capacity. Also, capacity admins can even override some tenant-level settings, but only with the boundaries of their capacity. This is helpful when different departments or regions have slightly different needs. This role can be assigned from the Fabric admin portal or from Azure, if the capacity is managed through Azure resources. You can think of that capacity admin is like a building manager. They control which teams are allowed to use the building, how much electricity or water each floor gets, and when maintenance is done. But they do not have keys to enter the rooms. In summary, the capacity admin role is perfect for delegating operational control over compute resources without giving broader admin rights over the whole tenant or the entire Fabric platform. Next, we have a very important topic for the DP-700 exam, and that is the workspace-level access and roles. These 4 different roles, admin, member, contributor, and viewer, can be granted on workspace level. I have copied this table directly from the Microsoft Learn documentation, and now let's go through it. We will start with the viewer role. A viewer can view and read contents of items like notebooks, data pipelines, Spark jobs, and event streams, and read the contents of KQL databases, KQL query sets, and real-time dashboards. They can also connect to the SQL endpoints of a lakehouse or warehouse and read data using TSQL. Viewer can also see execution outputs. This role is for users who only need to consume content or checking data but not modify anything. Next, we move up to the contributor role that grants you very wide access to the workspace. Basically, you can do almost everything in the workspace with this role, and this role is typically ideal for developers that need to build things in the workspace. However, this role doesn't grant rights to give workspace-level accesses to other people or identities. But that we can do with the member role. That gives that ability, and also the ability to allow others to reshare items. And finally, we have the admin role. Admins can do everything the previous role can, and more. They can update and delete the workspace itself, add or remove any people including other admins. This is the highest level of access at the workspace level, and it should be reserved for trusted users who need full control. Try to memorize this table as well as possible for the DP-700 exam, since most likely you are going to have some questions about this. On this slide, I will walk you through quickly how to give these different workspace level accesses. The easiest way is to open up a workspace, and then on the top right corner you can see this Manage Access button. Then click that, which will then open up the Manage Access tab. And there you can add more people or groups and also identities like service principals to that workspace to different roles that we covered on the previous slide. Now let's take a look at how domain-level role assignments work in Microsoft Fabric. Like covered in the beginning, domains allow logically grouping workspaces together. Let's first cover what Fabric admin can do with related to domains. The answer is actually quite simple, since it is pretty much everything that is possible, since Fabric admin is the king of the service. They can manage all domains in the organization. This includes adding or removing domain admins, assigning and removing workspaces from domains, and editing domain metadata. They also have full access to the domain tab in the admin portal. This means that they can view all domains regardless of ownership. Fabric admins can override tenant-level endorsement settings for individual domains. They are also responsible for creating new domains and assigning domain admins to manage them. However, they do not automatically get access to the workspaces unless they are added to those separately. But Fabric admins can easily add themselves as admin of any workspace if they so desire, but this access is not automatically given like we covered in the earlier slides. Next, we move to the domain admin. A domain admin can manage only the domain they are assigned to. They can add and remove contributors, assign workspaces to the domain, edit domain metadata, and remove workspaces if needed. They also get access to the domain tab in the admin portal, but only for the domains they manage. They cannot see or edit other domains outside of their own scope. Also, important thing to remember and highlight here is that domain admin is not a higher level role from the workspace level roles in a sense. Since granting domain admin role to somebody doesn't grant workspace accesses, and domain admin can't grant those accesses to themselves like Fabric admin can. So in that way, this admin role is similar to capacity admin role that we covered previously. The scope here is just different since now we are managing the domain and not the capacity. Now we move on to the domain contributor role. This role can be a bit confusing since this role is for workspace admins who have been given permissions to link their workspaces to a domain. They can add their workspace to a domain or change it to some other domain they have access to. But that is all. They cannot edit domain settings or manage contributors. They also cannot access the domain tab in the admin portal. So in short, Fabric admins manage all domains, domain admins manage their own domains, domain contributors only connect workspaces they are admin of to domains that they are assigned as contributors. And one final note, subdomains do not have separate admins, they inherit their admins from the parent domain. At least this is the case for now. Now let's take a look at how access control works at the item level in Microsoft Fabric. Inside a workspace, you can manage permissions for individual items. To do that, you go to the Items menu, select Manage Permissions, and then you add the user you want to give access to. If you don't give any of these additional permissions, user will just get a read access to that item. So the first additional permission is Share. This allows the person to share the item with others. It is also known as reshare access. Next is Edit. This gives the permission to change the content of the item. For example, edit code cells in a notebook. This is also known as Write access. And then there is Run. This lets the person execute the item. For example, to run a notebook. This is sometimes called Execute permission. But here is an important note. The run permission is not available for every item type that you can give access to. For example, a notebook you can execute, but Spark environment you can't. And thus, if you would open the same menu for it, you wouldn't find this execute permission there. Also, not every item in Fabric supports item-level access management yet, and few items like Lakehouses and Warehouses have more granular item-level access management since they are data stores and can contain objects like tables in them. So let's take a look at them next. Let's first take a closer look at how item-level access works for a Lakehouse in Microsoft Fabric. When you open the same item-level access menu for Lakehouse, we get quite different options there. On the top, we have this text. People you share this Lakehouse with can open it and its SQL endpoint and read the default dataset. To allow them to read directly in the Lakehouse, grant additional permissions. Which means that if we would just share this Lakehouse without any additional permissions that can be seen lower in the picture, we would already get some access to this Lakehouse. So let's break that down. When you share a Lakehouse without any additional permissions, the person you share with it can open it and connect to its TSQL endpoint, and this applies to tools like SQL Server Management Studio. However, they can't read any data that is in this lakehouse. So what is the point of sharing lakehouses without any of these additional permissions? Well, the main reason is that since users can now connect to this lakehouse, you can give them more granular object and row and column level accesses that we are going to cover in the next episode. Also, this access allows users to read the default semantic model of the lakehouse. And if you remember, we can also store files to the lakehouse, but with this access, you can't get any access to those files without any additional permissions. Next, let's talk about those additional permissions that can be given when sharing a lakehouse. First, we have read all SQL endpoint data. This gives the user read access to all the data available through the SQL endpoint. It works like the DB data reader role in traditional SQL server, if you are familiar with that. Second, we have read all Apache Spark and subscribe to events. This allows the user to work with Spark notebooks and jobs and access raw files in the lakehouse. It also enables event subscriptions from this lakehouse. For example, if you'd like to build event triggers based from this lakehouse, like for example file arrivals, etc. Also, very important thing to highlight here is that this access is needed if you'd like to shortcut the data in this lakehouse to another lakehouse in Fabric. As third additional permission, we have then build reports on the default semantic model. This allows the users to connect to the semantic model from tools like Power BI Desktop or Service and create visual reports. But this doesn't give direct access to the tables or files behind the model. So overall, you have fine-grained control over what users can do with a lakehouse. And the most important thing to remember, not all permissions are needed in every case. Always follow the principle of least privilege and only grant what is necessary. Let's now take a closer look at how item-level access works for warehouse in Microsoft Fabric. Just like we saw with lakehouses, when we open the item-level access menu for warehouse, we see a permission panel with a similar structure but a slightly different options this time. On the top, we can see a message that says, people you share this warehouse with can connect to it. To give additional permissions, select them from the list. This means that even without any additional permissions selected, the user will get some basic access to the warehouse like with Lakehouse. So let's break down what this actually includes. When you share a warehouse without selecting any extra permissions, the person can open it and connect to it using tools like SQL Server Management Studio, but they cannot read any data unless further permissions are granted, just like with Lakehouse. So what is the point of sharing warehouse without those extra permissions? The answer is the same as with Lakehouse. Once the person can connect to the warehouse, you can apply object, row and column level security to give them access to only the data they should see and not all the data in the warehouse. Now let's take a look at the additional permissions available when sharing a warehouse. First, we have read all using SQL. This gives the person read access to all the data in the warehouse using TSQL. Next, we have read all OneLake data and subscribe to events. This grants access to OneLake file system that sits behind the warehouse. It also allows the person to use Spark notebooks to read warehouse data and subscribe to OneLake events that are generated for that warehouse. This is similar to Spark access in Lakehouse permissions. Although the data structure and use cases are a bit different, the logic is still the same. Then we have build reports on the default semantic model. Just like in the Lakehouse, this gives access to the dataset through the tools like Power BI Desktop and Power BI Service. It doesn't give direct access to the database tables or files. It works only through the semantic model. Next is the monitor permission. This gives access to dynamic data management views, often called DMVs, and query insights, so that users can monitor queries running in the warehouse. Then we have the audit permission. This allows access to audit logs using TSQL so that you can investigate who did what inside the warehouse. And finally, there is reshare access. This means that user can share the warehouse with others along with the permissions they have been granted. So, to summarize, just like with lakehouses, you have a flexible and layered control over who can do what with the warehouse. And just like before, the most important thing is to follow the principle of least privilege. Only grant the permissions that are necessary and nothing more. So don't just aimlessly tap all of these additional permissions if they are not really needed. And one more thing that I want to say about this item level access is that it doesn't really matter what accesses you give at this level if the user already has, for example, contributor access to the workspace, since it will override that access that you have given at the item level. So keep that in mind. But now let's go to Fabric and let's do a demo about these topics together. Before we open Fabric, I would like to know that I spent a ton of my free time creating these videos for you, and that's why I would like to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more DP-700 and Fabric content. This doesn't cost you anything, and I would highly appreciate that. Also, if you'd like to support the channel with a cup of coffee, you can do so by clicking the Buy Me a Coffee link that can be found in the description. But now, let's go to Fabric. Now we're in Fabric, and I have created these two new workspaces to Fabric, Marketing Analytics and Sales Operations. Then I have also created this new user to Fabric called Aleksi Partanen 2, and I'm going to use this second account to demonstrate the access control to you by gradually giving it more access. And here in this picture, we can see the setup that we are going to use to give those accesses to that account. So there we have those two workspaces that I just showed to you. So we have the sales operation workspace, and then we have the marketing analytics workspace. And under that sales operation workspace, we have a lakehouse and some other resources. And in that lakehouse, we have, of course, the SQL endpoint and the Spark/OneLake endpoint. And we can see that the SQL endpoint will give accesses to tables, and the Spark/OneLake endpoint will give accesses to tables and also files. And then I have also this one domain there called sales and marketing, and then I have a new Fabric capacity for sales and marketing also. And now we are going to start to give some more access to that second account. And this time we will start from the bottom and go to the top. So now we are going to start from the item level and go up from there. So the first access that I'm actually going to give it is to share just the lakehouse there without giving any additional permissions. So let's do that. So here we have the sales operation workspace, and here we have the lakehouse in that workspace. Now I'm going to click this manage permissions here, and I'm going to actually add that user that I have created and grant that permission for it. So let's find it, Aleksi Partanen 2, there it is. And I'm not going to notify him when I give these accesses, but now I'm not going to give any additional permissions. So I will just share this lakehouse with that account, so that account is then able to connect to this lakehouse using TSQL endpoint, but can't actually query any data. So I will grant that, and then we are going to see a new row in these accesses here. And now I will go to that second account. And here I have that second account, and every time you can see this red or crimson top bar here, you know that I'm using this Aleksi Partanen 2 account here. And we cannot actually see that workspace where that lakehouse is, but we can actually connect to its TSQL endpoint by using, for example, SQL Server's Management Studio. And now I need a connection string to this lakehouse, and we can find it here. So we open the lakehouse, and then we open these settings here, and then we have the SQL Analytics endpoint, and here we have the connection string that we can use with SQL Server Management Studio. So let's open the SSMS now. And now we are in the SQL Server Management Studio, and here we can connect to that endpoint by using the connection string here. And we can click this connect button, and then we are going to use that second account to connect to that endpoint. And now we should have the connection. And indeed, we have the connection, and here we can see that lakehouse database there. But we cannot actually see any tables in that lakehouse, because we don't have any permissions to read data from here. We just have the permissions to connect here. So now we would be able to use like object and row and column level security to grant some access to this account. But that is the topic for the next episode. Now I'm going to go back to Fabric and grant more access to that account. And now I'm going to actually add this read all SQL endpoint permission, which will then grant us read access to all the tables and views that we have in that endpoint. But it is good to keep in mind that this access won't grant you access to the lakehouse files, since those files are not exposed through the TSQL endpoint. So now we are going to expand the accesses to this lakehouse and also select the read all SQL endpoint data and grant that. And now we have granted that, and now we can go back to the SQL Server Management Studio and let's see, does anything change there. And now under the table section, we can see this DPO sales data. And we are actually able to query that data and see the contents in that table. But it seems that that's the only table that we have in this lakehouse. And we can see that there are few rows of data. And we can go to this sales operation workspace and check out our lakehouse and indeed see that there is only this one DBO sales table. And we can also see that we have some content under the file section as well. And there is also this sales.csv that actually contains that same data that we have in the table, but now in CSV format. Next, we are also going to add this read all Apache Spark permission for that account. So then we are able to get access to that file section as well. And cool thing that this also enables us to build shortcuts from this lakehouse to another lakehouse. And now I'm going to grant that read all permission to that second account by clicking these three dots here and clicking read all. And now we can see that we have read and read all permissions to this lakehouse. And in the My Workspace of that second account, we can open up the lakehouse, and now we can, for example, create a new schema shortcut, and we can click this one lake source here, and here we can see that lakehouse to which I have given those permissions to. And we can click next, and now we should be able to see this sales table here, and also under this file section we would be able to see that CSV file in this staging folder. And with this permission we would be able to create a shortcut to this workspace from that other workspace where we only have that item level access to. But yeah, we're not going to actually create a shortcut now. Next, we are actually going to give the first workspace level access to that account, and I'm going to grant this viewer access to this sales operation workspace. So we would be able to see other resources also in that workspace and also the entire workspace, but we wouldn't be able to change anything with that viewer permission because it's read only. So with this main account, let's go to the workspace level and then click this manage access and then add people or groups. And then I will have to find my second account here, and there it is. And then I'm going to only grant the viewer role for it to this workspace. So let's click add, and now it has been added, and we can see that that second account is now a viewer in this workspace. And now if we go back to that account, we should be able to see the workspace here, and here we can see that workspace. And now we have the viewer/reader access to all the resources and items that we have in that workspace. But with this access, we cannot actually change anything here. And now we move one step above the workspace level, and we are going to actually grant domain admin access for that second account. But like we covered in the theory section, domain admin access doesn't give any accesses on workspace level. So this access is only for managing that governing domain where those workspaces are grouped to. So you will get only the access to manage that domain, but not any access to those workspaces. And now let's check out how we can give that domain admin access. Here on my main account, I will go to the settings and then open up the admin portal. And here we can see this domains tab here, and we can open that. And here in the domain tab, I would be able to see all the domains that we have in this tenant, but now I filtered these with the DP-700. And here we can see that sales and marketing domain, and we can open up that. And we can see that we have two workspaces in that domain. We have that sales operation workspace, and then we have that marketing analytics workspace. And here we have the domain settings for this domain, and here we can assign new admins to this domain. So let's find that second account here, and there it is. And now we can click apply and apply this domain admin for that account. And now we will go to that account. And now with this second account, we can open up the settings and go to the admin portal. And we can see that with this account, I cannot see a lot of stuff here in the admin portal. That's because this account is not Fabric admin or global admin. But yeah, we have these domain tabs here. And here we can see that sales and marketing domain to which I have access to. But you can see that I can only see that domain. And now I have the admin access to this domain, and I would be able to modify this domain and add new workspaces to this domain and also modify the domain image and this kind of a description, but I cannot actually rename the domain here. So I have a little bit limited access to this domain, but I can do this like general administrative tasks with it. But like I said, the domain admin doesn't actually give any access to these workspaces that we have here. And here on the workspace tab, we can only see the sales operation workspace because we gave that viewer access to that workspace previously. But to that marketing analytics workspace, we don't have any access, even though we are the domain admin. So the domain admin role is really scoped to this only one specific thing here in Fabric. And next, we are going to add some capacity admin access to that second account. And like with the domain admin, this capacity admin is also strictly scoped, so that it only gives admin access to that capacity. And I have this sales and marketing capacity to which I'm going to assign this kind of a capacity admin to that second account. And keep in mind that this capacity admin is really only scoped to that capacity so that we can manage that compute resource. So it doesn't give any accesses to domain and workspaces. We only have these accesses because we have given them in the previous steps. So if we would only give that capacity admin and we wouldn't have these accesses here, these boxes should be also red. Capacity admin can be actually given in two places if you have your Fabric capacity in Azure. It can be given here in the capacity settings here in the admin portal, but it can also be given here in Azure. And here I have this Fabric capacity resource here in Azure, and here we have this capacity administrator tab. And here I would be able to add new capacity administrators to this capacity. But yeah, we can go back to the admin portal and add it here. And then we can go to this Fabric capacity tab, and here we can see the capacity that we are talking about here. And let's open up that. And here we have these admin permissions, and to here I can add that second account as admin, and then I can apply those changes. And now that second account has admin access to this capacity and can manage this capacity here in the admin portal. And now with this account, we can open up the capacity settings tab. And this account should only see that capacity to which we have given that admin permission to. So we can see that we only have this one capacity here in Fabric capacity tab. And we can open up that. And now here on the capacity settings, we would be able to manage this capacity and, for example, turn on the surge protection or manage these other settings here. And here in this other tab, we can also override some tenant settings that have been defined on tenant level so that we can override them on the capacity level so that we have some control over these settings on capacity level as well. But yeah, the key thing to remember about the capacity admin is that it is this very tightly scoped admin access so that we can basically only manage the capacity with it, and it doesn't give any other accesses. And as a last access here, we have the Fabric admin access. And with this access, we would actually get automatic capacity admin access and also automatic domain admin access. But like said, workspace accesses are not given automatically to Fabric admins, but of course Fabric admin can get access to workspaces if he or she so wants. Fabric admin is actually given at tenant level, and we manage it here in the Entra ID. And here we can see that on my first account I have the global administrator rights. So with this account I would be able to give Fabric admin rights to my second account. And in my second account I don't have any assigned roles here, but here I would be actually able to do a role assignment and find that Fabric administrator and grant that to that second account. But I'm not actually going to do that because propagating that access will actually take a while and I cannot wait right now. So I'm not going to give that. I can use this account to demonstrate what kind of things we can do with the Fabric admin access. So basically we have all the access to the admin portal as we can see here. So we can see a lot more tabs here than we can see with that other account, and we can access this workspace tab where we would be able to give access to any workspace we want. And also with these Fabric admin accesses we would be able to access admin monitoring workspace that we can see here. But I think this is enough for this demo section today. And before we have those questions about today's topic, I would like to tell you about this website called certiace.com that I have created with few friends. This website basically offers some free custom-made practice questions to certification exams like DP-700 and DP-600. So after watching this video, go check out certiace.com. But now let's have those practice questions. Let's have our first question. You have two lakehouses in Microsoft Fabric, Lakehouse A in Workspace A, Lakehouse B in Workspace B. A data engineer needs to create file shortcuts from Lakehouse A to Lakehouse B. Which accesses should be granted for the data engineer? Follow the principle of least privilege. A. Workspace contributor on Workspace A. B. Workspace admin on Workspace A. C. Read all Apache Spark and subscribe to events on Lakehouse A. D. Read all SQL endpoint data on Lakehouse A. Now think about the answer for a moment and pause the video. I will reveal the answer in 3, 2, 1. The correct answer is C, since read all Apache Spark grants the data engineer this access and it is only scoped to the Lakehouse itself. A and B would give the data engineer also the ability to do the shortcuts, but also give access to the entire workspace, so the scope is wider and thus it doesn't follow the principle of least privilege. D wouldn't give the data engineer an ability to do that shortcut, since the data engineer would be only able to use the SQL endpoint of the Lakehouse and read data through it. Let's have another question. You are designing access control in Mux Fabric. One user needs to assign workspaces to a specific domains, manage metadata for those domains. According to the principle of least privilege, which role is the most appropriate? A. Workspace admin, B. Domain admin, C. Domain contributor, D. Domain member. Now think about the answer for a moment and pause the video. I will reveal the answer in 3, 2, 1. The correct answer is B, domain admin, since it is the only one out of these who can manage the metadata for those domains. A is incorrect since workspace admins doesn't have access to domains. C is incorrect because domain contributors can manage metadata for domains. D is incorrect because this kind of role doesn't even exist. And that is all for this video. If you'd like to learn more about Fabric Access Control, check out the next video in this series, where we cover row, column and object level access. But now I thank you for watching and see you in that video.